These audio adventures are supported by listeners like you. Without your help, these stories can't be produced. If these stories feed your imagination, please consider helping me feed my family by visiting joshuadavidling.com/support and becoming a monthly contributor. Or you can tip me on Cash App, $ Joshua David Ling. If you'd like to be a sponsor of this podcast in exchange for an audio advertisement, get in contact with me at joshuadavidling.com. Today's episode is sponsored by the following.
Christians who are artists, artisans, and creators are a unique unit in the war on culture. They're often over and underestimated at the same time. What does it take to be an artist, and what does it take to win the culture war? Join Joshua David Ling as he rallies the troops to answer these questions and promote the best artists for God's glory. We're in this war together. Join us at the front at joshuadavidling.com/poets-at-war.
Mike Kraft is your standard lonely trucker on the open road, but something paranormal keeps following him. This is Ghost Trucker. And now, Ghost Trucker, Episode 1, Stragglers. 1. Truck Stop. I'll never forget the songs we sang. I'll never forget the games we played. I'll never forget the times we had, and I owe it all to you. Mike Kraft scoffed at the lyrics on the radio. Inside that rundown truck stop, he had a long way to go to Fort Bragg, California, and his mind needed to be tip-top. An old man sat on a guitar stool behind the counter chewing gum. He stared at a TV listlessly, seeming to have no fun. "Y'all ain't got the jerky I want. What y'all reckon is the best?" The man took no notice of Mike, so Mike continued to press. "I said you ain't got the jerky I want." "I heard you before. I don't know. I don't eat jerky." "And what good are you for?" The man grabbed a shotgun off his counter and began to head toward Mike. Mike put up his hands in a placating gesture. Hey, I don't want to." "Shh!" The man hushed him and walked past Mike to the door. "There's a storm brewing out on Route 50, and there's lots of danger in store. Many have gone down that road, and many have been driven mad. Your truck may survive the white-hot desert, but will your mind last?" Mike laughed and sighed aloud. "That's a good one there. I've done this run 8 times before, but you sure did give me a scare. Look, I'll just take this one here. Will you ring me up?" The man put his gun back on the counter and sat down in a huff. He rang up Mike and said no more. Mike went back to his truck. "Stupid, crazy small-town men. I wish I had another spot for my truck." He climbed inside and dialed the radio, and soon he began to drink. He looked at a few pictures on the wall and just sat there, trying to think. He saw his mom, his dad, and others, but he stared at an empty spot. "Get some good sleep tonight, Mike. It's a long road ahead." "Stop!" Mike jumped at the sudden scream from his speakers. The radio crackled and popped. But a moment later, his signal came back and he searched around for his Glock. But nothing else happened that night. And in fact, he slept well. It's a good thing, too, because he would need it to make it through the desert's spells. 2. Melanie. As Mike Kraft flew down the highway, the radio continued its static. The interference was getting to him, as was the enigmatic moment several hours ago when the radio screamed at him. And the weather wasn't looking good either. In fact, it looked rather grim. As the road stretched on and on, a tiny shape came into view. It was so dark that he almost missed it, and his alertness he renewed. He swerved to avoid the humanish object, but felt that something was hit. He cursed under his breath and pulled over to take a look at it. He ran back 50 yards or so and saw a little girl. She was shaking in the cold of the desert, and fright had rocked her world. She stared down at the remnants of a hard-cover backpack, the victim of Mike's 18 wheels, and when Mike shouted, she shouted back. "What the flying squirrel you doing? Do you realize where you are?" "I'm walking to California. Is it very far?" The girl shook with cold and fear, and Mike couldn't believe his eyes. He grabbed his phone from out of his pocket and lifted it to the skies. "No signal. Figures. Dispatch has been pinching pennies, downgrading the phone service and plans. What a bunch of ninnies. Girl, what is your name?" She took a moment to respond as Mike grew patient with her. "Melanie is my name." "Well, I'm not leaving you out here for sure. Come with me to the next town and the police can help you there." They gathered up her undamaged belongings and got aboard his truck and drove on to the next town to see what would be their luck. 3. More signs. The night air was still upon their route, not even a little breeze. Melanie laid cuddled up in the passenger seat as Mike drove steadily with ease. Now that she had drifted to sleep, he flipped on his radio, hoping to find a good station to keep him alert and on the go. He flipped to the first channel on the dial. "I'll never forget the songs we sang. I'll never forget the games we played. I'll never forget the times we had, and I owe it all to you." Mike changed the station. He hated that song, but it buzzed and crackled, and before too long it repeated those same 4 lines again, and he punched the radio in frustration then. "I'll never forget the songs we sang. I'll never forget the games we played. I'll never forget the times we had, and I owe it all to you." Melanie stirred at the sound of the punch and the swelling of the tune. Then Mike turned it off, but the song still fought through the gloom of the night and the darkness that lay around, and it began to grow louder than every other sound. "I'll never forget the songs we sang. I'll never forget the games we played. I'll never forget the times we had, and I owe it all to you." Melanie stirred as Mike grew cold, and the noise continued to grow. But Mike had to hold his wheel tight and keep his eyes on the road. For even though they felt no wind against the sides of the rig, the overhead roadway signs quavered and started to do a jig. Melanie screamed as one fell down, and Mike had to swerve to pass. Others began to melt like butter as they went under an overpass. "Hang on!" Mike screamed aloud as they rocketed down the road, and Melanie closed her eyes shut and tried to be brave and bold. 4. Bacon and eggs. The next thing Melanie knew, she was waking up in a bed. She smelled bacon and eggs cooking, which soothed her aching head. "Hey, you waking up over there?" the gruff trucker yelled to her. She covered her ears with a pillow, and he laughed. "Just making sure." A few moments later, Melanie yawned and stretched her tiny arms. Mike brought a plate over to her, and she smiled at the breakfast warm. "You ain't much of a morning person, huh?" Melanie shook her head. "Probably still freaked out about last night." Melanie shivered with dread. Up until then, she believed the previous nightmare had been simply that. But Mike's voice grew grave as he took off his beige, dusty trucker cap. "You remember it too, huh? I'm not sure what went down. I saw things, and they were gone, and then we just went into town. You had fallen asleep by then, so I just carried you. I'm going to take you to the sheriff's office later. They'll be able to help you." Melanie made to protest, but Mike cut her off. His phone rang and he answered it, and began to loudly talk. His attention toward her shifted, and he began to pace all over the hotel room while she ate the food on her plate. As she ate, however, and Mike with someone jawed, she thought she heard a set of strings as if from heaven or God. She listened closely and followed the sound to their exit door, and then she peeked to see if Mike was still yammering away from her. Mike's attention was completely fixed on whatever this phone call was, so Melanie slipped out of the room without so much as a pause. 5. Moment of joy. Melanie walked slowly, as if not to scare away the beautiful sonic creatures that floated her way. Every shimmering note seemed like a song in itself. They'd spring to life and fire in a moment and dance back down with a yelp. They seemed fraught with sorrow and pain, but hope still lingered within. Then she saw the man playing and helplessly grinned. A man in his late 20s with brown skin and poorly cut hair was sitting on a bench by the hotel, laying his heart bare. His eyes were closed as he silently mouthed words to go with his song. A baseball cap laid beside him on the bench, disgustingly dingy and worn. It had been bright and white, but the dust and fabric's cuts served to make it almost brown with all the sweat and muck. Melanie bobbed her head, and her toes began to tap, and before she knew it, she was dancing and putting coins in his cap. He smiled and kept playing, quickening his pace. She giggled, and the two shared a joy within that tiny space. But soon he played discordantly and fumbled to a stop. Melanie turned and saw Mike standing with his arms crossed. "What do you think you're doing, boy? She's a little girl. Come on, Melanie, we're going to the sheriff." Mike took her and twirled her around, and off they went to try and get her back home, leaving the guitarist by himself, confused and alone. 6. The Sheriff. "If she doesn't want to give me her last name," the sheriff calmly said, "and all I can do is post her picture and simply hope for the best. My wife said she could stay with us, and she's coming to pick her up." "Sounds good to me, Sheriff. I just need to get back to my truck." "Sorry it took me so long. We've got over a dozen calls last night. Must be a full moon or something. Everyone's full of fright. Saying things like ghosts and junk. Reasonable people, too." "Huh," was all that Mike could say, but deep inside he knew something was following him down the road. But he didn't know how. "Well, thanks for taking the girl, Sheriff. I'm gonna head out now." During that conversation between the sheriff and Mike Kraft, Melanie was in the other room, lying on her back. She stared up at the ceiling fan, and then she heard a sound. The man's guitar was playing again, and she sat up and looked around. She checked to see if Mike and the sheriff were still discussing her fate. She rolled her eyes at some of their words and slipped out the back gate, thinking, "They can't tell me what to do. I've got to get away." She followed the sound of that guitar her siren song did play. 7. Hitchin' a Ride. Mike Kraft thundered down the road, finally on track it seemed. "Finally, some peace and quiet," Mike to himself beamed. He'd cut a couple of wires last night on his FM radio. Hopefully there'd be no more freak shows for his many miles left to go. Bang and clang went several noises that nearly made him swerve. Something was back in his trailer, so he pulled off the road to serve a bit of Texan justice to whatever made that noise. He pulled his handgun out of the dash and walked back to the door, poised. He inspected the plastic seal and saw it had definitely been cut. He sighed in both relief and worry. "This is just my luck." He lifted the latch and shined his gun light into the trailer then. All the cargo was accounted for, it seemed. "Come out, you clucking hens!" Then sheepishly, from behind a pallet, came Melanie and the man with the guitar. Melanie had her arms crossed and the man's were in the air.
"Why won't you two leave me alone?"
he said, lowering his weapon fast. She came out of the truck. I tried to stop her, the man blurted out in a blast. I saw a ghost get in the truck.
"Both of you get out now."
They carefully came out of the trailer and dropped down to the ground. 8. Black ash.
"There ain't no ghost smell,"
Mike said, climbing into the trailer. He shuffled about the pallets with full plastic containers. Mike knew that he was going to lose money since the seal was broke, especially since he knew that it was a government load. He ripped the lid off one and peered deep inside. Melanie winced and held her friend. All three's nerves were fried. Mike looked in and saw some sort of black ash. He knew this was going to a disposal facility, so he didn't want to ask. He closed the lid and then hopped down.
"Now what should I do with y'all?"
He yelled above his roaring truck, but then it began to stall. He stood for a moment, slightly confused, then went to start it again. But no matter how he turned the key, no sound came from within. 9. Peanut butter and jelly.
"I took a quick look, but it seems like it'd be smarter to wait for the mechanic,"
Mike told his two guests while they sat in his truck's apartment feeling manic.
"I had to use a satellite phone I purchased with my own coin back in town. Stupid dispatch been pinching pennies. I told them, what happens if we break down? We're really out in the sticks. Gotta conserve energy in case things get dicey. Either of you two want a sandwich?"
They both nodded, and he made PB&J, and they sat and enjoyed their meal. Well, enjoy isn't exactly right, as everyone did feel the tension within that tiny room. Mike decided to break the silence.
"Well, why are you following this girl around?" he asked with great defiance.
My name is Ozzy. I'd appreciate if you'd use my name, kind sir.
"Well, Ozzy, what's your game? What team are you playing for?"
Stop being mean. He's just trying to help.
"Well, that's what I'm afraid of, Mel. Look, why don't you just start from the beginning? I'm sure you've got a tall tale to tell."
10. Ozzy. The music man with Latin skin took a deep breath, and his story did begin. My name is Oswaldo Dominguez. Most people call me Ozzy. I've been hitchhiking from Palestina, Mexico, like a one-minded kamikaze. My family sent me to the States. Their situation is dire. Twice our town has been burned by deliberately set fires. I am almost at the end of my funds. I had almost given up hope. Then this girl, who reminds me of my daughter, threw me a saving rope. She told me you're going to California, and along the way we'd go out from you and your truck and hitchhike to San Francisco. From there I can find a path to make it big. I can play my guitar and be found, and perhaps that will save mi familia and our little town."
"You just left your family? Don't Palestina have jobs? I'm sorry, Oz, but your story's a little odd. How dare you abandon your family like that?"
I had no choice. Then they all noticed something very bad. Instead of their roadside assistance savior, they saw a most threatening sight. 12 black SUVs sailed down Route 50 through the night. Men with suits arrived, then stepped out, surrounding the whole truck then. The three of our heroes sat silently freaking in Mike Kraft's truck cabin. Thanks for listening to this episode of Audio Adventures. If your imagination was fed by this story, I pray that you'll consider supporting these stories at joshuadavidling.com/support or on Cash App, $ Joshua David Ling. Until next time, keep adventuring.
Gone
dawn is my time to shine. Revolver on my hip, scorched leather on my head. They want me alive, but they'll also take me dead. They want me alive, but they'll also take me dead. Oh.